heard? Yes, it sounds like I can. We're going to start in about exactly a minute. If I can ask for a favor, if there are seats next to you towards the middle, could you move in towards the middle so that those on the side can also find their way in? Lots of people are quite shy. They will not come in. Good to see so many friends and familiar faces here. So if you could all scoot on in towards the middle of the room, we'll be able to start in just about 30 seconds. There are still seats in the front as well. The panels sing, dance, and do mime, but they don't bite, so please come forward. Okay, if anyone else in the middle of the exhibitions is coming to join us, please do. This is a good time to come join the panel, and we'll get going shortly. All right, I think we've got whoever we're going to get here. This looks like a great crowd. I'm really happy to have you all here for this panel on how we keep technology accountable in the future. We've all decided that we might stand when we're speaking just to make it a bit easier for you to see us as well. And we want to start really by thanking you for being here. The previous panel was all about artificial intelligence, so we're broadening the discussion now to think about accountability and who exactly is going to be kept accountable, even as we think through what those mechanisms are. We've got three great panelists here with us, and I'm going to ask them to do a quick thing. Introduce yourselves in about the length of a tweet. Okay? Since we're all tech savvy, right? Introduce yourselves very quickly, and then we've got a few questions that I'd like to get through with them. No long introductory remarks, and after we're done with that, we'll take questions from all of you. So, one tweet, Jamie.
Jamie Metzl, founder and chair of OneShared.World, author of Hacking Darwin, and member of WHO Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing.
Excellent. Also, Ironman competitor, he forgot to mention that, ran the marathon yesterday. In case anybody wants to feel like a slacker, this is the good time to actually do that. June.
Hi, I'm June Brawner. I'm a senior policy advisor for data and digital technologies at the Royal Society in London, which is the UK's National Academy of Science. I am an anthropologist of data, and I study the social life of technology and its impact on the world.
Excellent. We need more anthropologists in pretty much every sphere of the world, I think so. Really glad you're here with us, June. And Olivier?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Olivier Desbiey. I am exploring the futures with an S for AXA Group, so the insurance company. That's it. In the Twitter.
Yeah.
Surfer.
Tweet like
I am a surfer, it's true.
Wow.
Yes.
So this is a panel that's bringing together a lot of multidisciplinary skills and expertise. My name is Maniam. I teach on technology and policy at the Blavatnik School of Government in Oxford. And before that, I was for a very long time a civil servant in the Singapore government, but I'm recovering from that at the moment. It was a great experience, but I'm enjoying what I do now as well. So what we've decided to do is, normally in these panels we kind of meander our way through many different issues, and by the end we reach a few key points that we try and share with all of you to remember. What I've asked the panelists to do though is let's start with that, right? What are the key 1 to 2 things they really want all of you to take away from this panel? So those of you who are taking notes, that'll be the core of where we're going, and then we can hopefully go deeper into that discussion. So one set of key points here, and June, we're going to start with you on this one, if that's all right. What are your key things that the audience must take away?
All right. Well, you must take away that the Royal Society is the UK's oldest, it's the UK's Academy of Sciences, the oldest scientific academy in the world, and since 1660, we've been thinking a lot about the future of science and how it will benefit humanity. Most recently, we've been thinking a lot about what that means for AI safety and in the context of the use of data. So we have a couple of priority areas that I want to highlight for you, which kind of demonstrate how we are thinking both speculatively and empirically about how we use data to inform decision-making in the world and to inspire technologies that will benefit humanity into the future. We've been doing a lot of work on AI safety in the run-up to the Global Safety Summit that was held in the UK last month, and one of those events was a horizon scanning session with the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. What's come out of that is that it's very clear that AI is actually mediating the way that we make sense of the world in very new ways, and that has serious implications for epistemology, how we know what we know. And so I think when we think about holding technologies accountable, we have to come at it a bit obliquely. It's not just that AI is going to be something that transforms our lives in the future, but it's transforming how we interact with the world around us and how we make sense of natural phenomenon. Something that came out of that event was also that the scientific method is almost being rewritten in this context, because what we're doing is using models which are trained on data and drawing conclusions based on correlations in ways that we don't really understand. And so when that comes to scientific applications, drawing conclusions about cause and effect means something very different in the future, potentially. And that has huge implications for scientific discovery and, of course, our everyday lives going forward. The second thing that I wanted to highlight is that there is nothing artificial in artificial intelligence. And of course, AI systems are ultimately human systems, and that's because they're built on data which is produced, collected, curated, labeled by humans. And when we talk about bias in systems, of course, that tends to be where it creeps in. So access to data is something that we've been prioritizing under the banner of AI safety and technology regulation, because there's no way to make sure that these technologies work for everyone unless we have access to the building blocks that inform those technologies. So we've been working with the BBC on some work around synthetic media and how we can guarantee content provenance, which will be really important in the future, because misinformation, I think we see, is already having a big impact on society. We've been working with Humane Intelligence on a red teaming event, testing Meta's Llama 2 large language model, which is an open large language model, to test the guardrails of that for producing scientific misinformation. I know in the last panel there was some question around, is there any evidence that LLMs are helping to magnify misinformation, and we will be publishing a paper on that next year. I think what I can say for now is that it's not so much that it magnifies misinformation, but it draws conclusions and synthesizes information in ways that can be problematic, that imply that there are consensus where there are no consensus scientifically. And I think someone also pointed out that these models are not trained on personal data or private data, nor are they trained on data behind paywalls, which is where it becomes very important, because most of the scientific literature out there is, of course, behind a paywall. So naturally, these things are going to be problematic in terms of coming up with any kind of synthesis of information. So those are two key things we've been working on that I encourage you to look out for. I would love to speak to anyone for whom this rings a bell afterwards. And then just lastly to mention, we're working a lot on privacy-enhancing technologies. And these are not just tools for protecting personal data privacy, but for data collaboration, kind of approach them as partnership-enhancing tech. So for example, rather than sharing data, maybe you share algorithms in a sort of federated machine learning scenario. Or maybe you're using AI to generate synthetic data so that you can share data which looks very much like real-world data and could be useful in answering real-world questions, but isn't actually the real data. And then the last application...
10 seconds on this.
Under PETS is secure multi-party computation, which is basically a way to build in purpose limitation to technologies. I'd be happy to speak more on that, but do see our report from January of this year.
Great. I was particularly struck, June, when you talked about the kind of the things that are happening today that get perpetuated by the use of AI. Right?
Yeah.
One of the things we end up teaching a lot in public policy schools is something called Conway's Law, which the programmers amongst you will be familiar with. Right? That systems adopt technologies in ways that mirror their existing communication structures. So we'll adopt AI in ways that mirror exactly what we already do. So there's a huge status quo entrenching effect rather than a transformative effect in a lot of that work. So something we can keep in mind, because that will affect how we actually do accountability work later on. Olivier, what are your key 1 to 2 points?
Thank you, Aaron. So first, I love your process, because it is a very forward-looking process to start with a key takeaway for session at the beginning. So on my side, I have 2 takeaways I'd like to have in mind at the end. The first one is like, life is full of risk, but future should not be one of them. And I am saying that from an insurance perspective. And the other one, it's the second takeaway, because then I'm going to develop, of course, it is that regulating tech or making tech accountable for the future, to me, it's all about trust. It is a global concern that will ask for global solution also. So now, just to give you a bit of perspective on how we are seeing the world from an insurance perspective, we apply a layer of risk. So we are seeing risk everywhere, with a very ambivalent relationship to risk, because new risks are new opportunities of business for an insurance company. But if risk becomes too big, then it can collapse, so there is no more business. So this is the way we have this specific relationship to risk. And to better understand the risk landscape, for 10 years now, we are publishing a future risk report. The 2023 edition was published late October, and we are asking about 4,000 experts worldwide, risk managers worldwide, their ranking of risk, and what are, according to them, the emerging risks that can have the most impact on society from 5 to 10 years. And I want to mention that because it is a very good timing to talk about tech and accountability, because this year, in the top 5 risks, so we have climate change as a top concern, cyber risk, number 2, number 3 is geopolitical tension, unfortunately, number 4 is AI-related risk, and that specific risk was ranking in the 14th position last year. So it seems that we are ready at the moment of thinking about the consequences also of using tech, and having 2 tech-related risks in the top 5 means that we have an issue maybe with trust. So this was one of the points I wanted to also to weigh with you. And so for that, if we want to stick to the question how we can make tech accountable for the future, the idea is to maybe try to define some guided principles that we agree on to build that trust. And it is a role of researcher, probably. It is a role of the technology providers also, to ensure transparency, for example, on how it is working. And it is also the role of industry leaders to have a fair use of these technologies.
Okay. Let's keep that in mind, because what you're saying seems to be that you want to bring a whole range of stakeholders into this process, right? And it's not enough just for governments or companies alone to function on this. Let's hear from Jamie and then see if how we can further the conversation. Jamie, what are your key 1 to 2?
Perfect. I'm going to do 3, but I'll do them quickly with your permission. The first is that all of these technologies are tools, ... for now. And so as tools, the question is not what is the inherent capacity of these technologies. That's certainly important. The question for us is what human values will we deploy to guide the application of these very, very and increasingly powerful tools. The ... for now refers to what the anxiety that a lot of people are feeling here and around the world is that our AI systems are pretty much our first technologies that are presenting the possibility of someday having their own agency. And that's why thinking about the alignment problem is so significant now, even if that problem may not manifest for years or even decades. We have an opportunity now in these early stages of technological development to make sure that our best values are woven in to our most powerful technologies from the beginning. That's number 1. Number 2, because of that, governance is everything. And when we think about governance, some people tend to confuse governance and regulation. While regulation is an important piece of governance, governance has to be what we all do, what happens at every level, and whether it's norms in institutions, what's happening in different organizations, all across the board. I mentioned I was a member of the WHO Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing, and that was one of our main conclusions, is that to think about how, in this case, human genome editing, but it applies to AI and every other technology, to think about how they can be safely used. If we just say this is the job of governments alone, there's no way that we can possibly succeed. But that creates a problem because there are these key drivers. It's the Darwinian drivers. In Darwinian terms, it's random mutation and natural selection. In technological terms, it's diversity and competition. And so we have these diverse systems, diverse technologies, diverse governance and regulatory environments, and the applications of these very powerful technologies are competing against one another with massive implications. And to know what those implications are, all you have to do is look at the front between Russia and Ukraine, where there's a lot of learning going on about how to apply the latest technologies in order to achieve very specific real-world goals. So this is not an abstract question. We're seeing it in our economies and every place else. And that leads to the third essential point, that technology governance is a subset of global governance. And that connects to, we are here now in Dubai, and COP28 is going to be starting next week. And there is a reason why COP28 cannot succeed. It has nothing to do with the government of UAE or any other government. It's that our world is not organized to solve common problems. So there's a mismatch between the nature of the greatest challenges we face, which are global and common, and that's climate change, pandemics, AI, weapons of mass destruction. You can kind of go on and on and on. We can't solve any one of them. And we can't solve them because we are not organized to solve that entire category of problems. And so the way that we're doing it now, is that we have these different communities, and every community exists in its own vertical. So you have the people doing climate change, and then at the end of a 20 or 30-year career, people say, geez, the problem is global organization. We can't solve climate change because everybody is competing with each other. And the people in pandemics come to that same conclusion. Everybody does. And so what we need to do is the equivalent of finding a universal flu vaccine. And so the question is, what is the common element of all of these different flu strains, and how do we target that? Because if we're targeting each individual flu strain, we can do it forever and won't succeed. And that's why we need to think about frameworks, global frameworks. Our world has enhanced our global frameworks in 1648 after the 30 Years' War, 1945 after World War II. We will now have a global operating system upgrade to reflect the mutual responsibilities of our deep and complex global interdependence. There's a 99% chance we'll do it after the next crisis, and whether it's a synthetic biology pandemic killing 1 billion people, an ecosystem collapse, a nuclear war, 99% chance after that crisis we'll say, hey, we need to do things differently. There's a 1% chance, which is why we are all here now, that knowing that we're facing this challenge, we can come together and say, how do we upgrade our global operating system now to prevent that kind of crisis? And so in my mind, that is the charge for all of us and all of the organizations in which we operate. Thank you.
Okay, let's build a bit on this point from Jamie, right? How do we make that 1% not 1% and hopefully a little bit more? Because we've heard a lot of quite broad ideas around what needs to be done, a lot of diagnostics, if you like, on what the problem is. But what exactly are we going to do about it? So challenge to each of you, right? You all come from a sector. What can your sector do to make Jamie's 1% become, I don't know, 5% instead of 1%? And what do governments need to do? Because it is striking to me that on a panel about technology accountability, there isn't a government rep. There's a former government rep, but not quite a current government rep. But what would you say to current governments they need to do in order to increase our chances of surviving some of the governance challenges here? So I didn't warn them about this. I warned them about the first question, but not this one. But how do we start on this? Jamie?
Yeah, sure.
And let's stick to one idea, all right? Just one.
Okay,
one thing
good.
we would do tomorrow.
So just building on something that I just said a moment ago, in all of these different what I call verticals, climate change, WMD, everybody is reinventing the wheel. Everybody is doing some version of calling for the establishment of an observatory. Everybody is calling for a registry to know what's happening in the world. And everybody is calling for an equivalent of the IPCC, which they have for climate change, to bring together all of the latest science and technology. So my one idea is that governments and the United Nations should have a system for a framework for solving global problems and a structure around that. And then what that would do is for every one of these movements, like the climate change people, 80% of their efforts should be, how do we solve climate change? 20% of their efforts should be focused around how do we build a framework for solving global problems generically. And so I think we're too far downstream in our problem solving. And so by definition, we can't solve these problems starting from there. We need to move upstream.
Yeah. while also, of course, customizing for what the specifics are, right? Health doesn't look like AI or things like that. I have to say, I'm not sure how this is going to happen, given that we responded to a global pandemic by not really learning very much, and then we've now reverted back to non-masking behavior. Everything we do doesn't seem to suggest that we learned very much from COVID. So my very optimistic view on this, of course. June, what do you think is that one step we need to take?
Yeah, I think I'll build on something that Jamie said, which is hints at something I was hoping to say later, actually, just that we think about policy almost more as movement building, and I think information literacy would be a key part of that. One of the recommendations that we have in a lot of our reports is around regulatory collaboration. Sorry, I realize that's kind of a second thing. But not reinventing the wheel, so sharing best practices between governments. I know that with at least privacy-enhancing tech, for example, Singapore has been really great at spearheading some efforts to hold sandboxing environments, which let people test different technologies to see how we might operationalize the values we're talking about when it comes to creating new technologies. So international collaboration at the regulatory level seems like a practical maybe step in that direction.
Okay.
Yes, I would say also it is maybe. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
oh,
now we can. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, yes.
No,
I would say that in the insurance sector, we used to work with governments, especially when we're talking about big risk. For example, if you think about natural catastrophe, for example, we have a kind of PPP, public-private partnership also to deal with this kind of risk. So it is something that it is quite obvious, I would say, from an insurance perspective, not to work alone, because we cannot solve the problem alone. Another thing also can be to share our expertise from the insurance industry also to other stakeholders on the way we are modeling new risk, for example.
All right, so collaborate, share best practices, and have a framework for some of this work to at least start us off, right? Okay, let's hope we can get there, because the world doesn't look like it's getting there very quickly in any sort of way. We're going to have time for questions from all of you very shortly, but I wanted to just pose two other things to the panel. The first is that one of the key challenges in all the steps that all of you have pointed out is that tech keeps changing, right? So we have these best practices that we learn and we share with others, and then the world changes on us, and then we feel like we have to start from scratch, but maybe we don't have to start totally from scratch. How do we deal with the fact that the tech keeps changing? And maybe one thing that you can help us with is tell us something you've changed your mind about, in the last few years, because the tech actually keeps transforming. And how does that played out in the work that you have to do, right, in order to keep your technology accountable? I think we're going to start with Olivier for this one.
Yes, thank you. That's a very, very interesting question. So what I'm going to say maybe is not too much disruptive. To me, the biggest surprise is about the rapid emergence of generative AI. We are very using the tech to have a new hype cycle in a way. So we had the big data years ago, then AI. Can you hear me? I am sure you can hear me. Ooh. So it is another surprise with the tech. This one was not expected. I think you can hear me now. So I was mentioning, yes, that one of the biggest surprise to me is the rapid emergence of generative AI. Maybe you know this famous sentence saying that in technology we tend to overestimate the consequences in the short term and to underestimate in the long term. And I think it doesn't apply with generative AI because it's already there, and I think we have some a revolution is really going. And it is quite surprising to me because AI systems were already there. We use them to navigate in the city, to unlock our smartphone, to receive some kind of recommendation from Netflix or Spotify. But here we can have a direct relationship with AI, and it is completely changing the landscape. And I was thinking about something. When I was a kid, so let's say prior 2000, most of the technologies I was using, I can understand the way it works just by observing them. And this is a bit what we have sometimes when we have a car, you can understand how it works just by observing the car. And I think with AI, there is something completely different. It is very complicated, if you are not an engineer or even a good engineer, to understand how these technologies are working. And this leads me to my very first point about the trust, because the issue is that more and more technology can be seen as a black box. And it is really an issue for the trust of the people, even for the expert. I was referring to to the study we are doing, the future risk report, there was something just very surprising. Almost 2/3 of the experts think that in AI, we should take a break from research into AI because it's too dangerous.
The moratorium idea.
It's just unbelievable. 2/3 of the experts, and because the threat is existential for them. So, I mean, for that, we need, one more time, transparency, to work on systems that can be explainable. And this is the only way to make sure that we will still generate trust around tech.
All right, we've got about 15 minutes. So Jamie and then June.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the perfect place to talk about how we think about rapidly changing technology, because we're here in Dubai and UAE, and if you ask what is the source code of even this beautiful place where we are at the Museum of the Future, what's the source code of Dubai and the UAE, it's not technology, it's the wisdom and the foresight of these founding fathers and mothers. And so when we think about rapidly technological change, we know that that's going to happen. But the core human values that must guide these technologies if this entire endeavor is to be successful, those aren't going to change so much. As a matter of fact, if they change radically, like the Great Leap Forward or the French Revolution, that can actually be really, really dangerous. So it is a given that technology is going to change. The challenge for us is to know who we are and what we stand for, and then strive to make sure that our best values are woven into this journey at every step of the way. And then for coming back to the second question that Aaron posed about what did our minds change about, I have actually come to believe, including in this last year when the whole ChatGPT, LLM mania has spread, and I'm a huge believer that these technologies will be transformative, that being human and being a great human is now more important than it's ever been before. We just have to figure out what that means. For any of us, if we are competing head-to-head with an AI system, trying to do something that AIs do better than we do, like certain types of calculations or predictions or whatever, that's a losing gambit for humans. But there is a huge space of contributions that we can make, core human contributions, and I think that's more important now really than ever before.
So you want human augmentation by the tech rather than pure substitution. Great if we can get there, I guess. Yeah. So June.
So something I've changed my mind about. I don't know that it's so much a mind change as much a continuing evolution of my perspective on what policy means. And again, hinting at what Jamie suggested earlier, governance is something that we all do every day. And so when we try to think about influencing the governance of technology, something we've really shifted within our own team is thinking about where those levers of change really are. So if, for example, this red teaming event that we were hosting using Meta's large language model inspires Meta to change something about the way they treat their open LLMs or the way that they approach guardrailing, then for me that's a big impact. So I think how we perceive impact in the short term and how that maps onto the long term is something that's always evolving in my mind. And I guess related to that is this idea that with the rise of things like ChatGPT that we've democratized AI. I don't really see it that way. I think we've democratized access to a commercial product, but nobody knows what's under the hood. I think even a lot of the people who are building these products. We all have cars, but not all of us could change the engine, and I don't think that makes us all, mechanics. So it's interesting to see this moment in time where we all have access to something that's really powerful and transformative and that we don't really understand. And I think that's kind of shifted my perspective on maybe the future of AI and kind of the everyday life of AI and the role of the everyday person.
Yeah. Next week when I get back to Oxford, I'm teaching 60 students about how we can use ChatGPT better to do policy making. Not just to kind of do their assignments for them, but to actually use it as a policy tool, partly so that we get under the hood and figure out what exactly the mechanics of things are. Not an easy one to do, but I think we have to at least start by acquiring some of that literacy. Let's take some questions from all of you. I detect a good energy here already. Right, let's start with you, and then Hugh, and then we'll come to the back after that as much as we can. Yep. Okay.
Thanks.
Yes, and if I can ask that your questions, first of all, be questions. They have to end with a question mark, not just be, here's my thought, please comment. And keep them as brief as you can. Yes, sir, please.
Thank you. Was really an illuminating session here. Okay, back to you, Olivier. You mentioned the 4,000 experts, put the survey for the global risk response. I'm one of those 4,000 people who I feel really proud that I participated in this survey. Question here is, we're talking about accountability, right? And I see the world, when it comes to AI and generative AI now, maybe, of course, there is a European Union approach to this, which is AI Act, okay, and we're still waiting for that. But my question to the panelists here, do we believe in self-regulations when it comes to a technology such as AI? Is self-regulation going to guarantee us accountability? And if not, then, of course, we're talking about enforced regulation. With enforced regulation, we see the opposition that, no, we don't want to regulate AI because it's going to stifle innovation. If we do it right, I don't think that this is going to stifle innovation. That's just my observation.
Okay, so self-regulation and how do we do it in a way that doesn't stymie innovation? The gentleman here and then lady here. Yeah. You want to take let's take all. No. Let's take 3 questions because otherwise we'll never get to more than one. Yeah.
Great. My name's John Sone. I'm an author and a faculty at a few universities.
Yeah.
I think the big problem we're having in the world today is the level of awareness of the people making these decisions. Mm-hmm. Einstein's famous term, you cannot solve a problem from the same awareness that created it. Isn't the problem that we're asking the people that caused the problem to now try and find a solution for it? Should we not be finding a way to change our awareness or ask different people to come up with solutions?
Yeah. The panel will come to that, but foresight is partly about changing how we perceive the world. So maybe that's part of what we can do. But ma'am, you had a question?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. You point, Shamie, a huge challenge. We are not having the ability to deal with common problems, you said. And you said we need a system for frameworks. We need a global framework. But to have a global framework, it's also to have a common cognitive frameworks. It's about paradigms, and it's about cultural frameworks where the values are. So how can we go through this huge challenge?
Yeah. Great, thank you. And I'm going to take 2 more so that we can hopefully, I'm sorry, we won't take everything, but I'll take 2 that had their hands up earlier. So you and then John Carney after that, yeah. I know this is a huge burden on the 3 of you, but you manage and I'll keep you on track with the questions. Go on.
Thank you. Thank you, Dubai, as well for this event. Listen, it's about AGI. So arguably it's going to be the only way for us to continue as a race. In the ability for it to answer problems that we're talking about today, and we will never be able to solve ourselves. Statement of fact, maybe. Therefore, should not a definition on, the ethics and the discussions we're talking about be, a human race's main objective?
Okay, so maybe sharpen that question for us a bit. The role
a
of
definition
ethics,
of what we're classifying as the education for our infant AI, AGI, how we're going to train it, how we're going to educate it,
right.
What those ethics are, should that not be our main objective as a race?
Got it. Right. So the role of the ethics and how we train the AI, actually. John? And then don't feel you have to respond to all 5 of these questions.
Sorry,
Take
John.
the ones that go on well.
Yeah, John Carney from the UK. My simple question is, do we need a new breed of lawyers? I'm feeling sorry for lawyers here. And I take the point that it's governance, not regulation. But what's our advice to lawyers? Over.
Yeah. And this links a bit to the point of common cognitive and cultural frameworks, right? What are the common frames that we actually use to build all of this? All right, so the 3 of you have an interesting role here. Don't feel you have to answer all of these questions, but pick the ones, and I think they are quite related actually. Right? What are the common frames, the common cognitive as well as cultural and intellectual approaches that we can take that help us to achieve some of this work? Jamie, you want to start us off and then we'll just go down the line?
I'll go quickly because I think the answers to the questions were embedded in pretty much all of the questions. Self-regulation, is not enough. This is transformative technology. It's just insane and self-defeating. And whether that's the OpenAI with their algorithms or scientists working on with dangerous pathogens, really across the board, self-regulation is one piece of governance. It's critically important. But if that's the entire strategy, it's just an insane strategy. Having said that, governments need to figure out what is the right level of regulation. We need to think about governance more broadly, but anybody who says with any of these technologies, self-regulation is the way to go, that really frightens me. Awareness, absolutely. I mean, and it's your two questions are connected. All of these technologies exist within a cognitive frame, a cultural frame, and if we just think of these technologies as disembodied, separate from who we are and what we stand for, that can be extremely dangerous. And so that's why even gatherings like this are so important. If we want to have common frameworks, we're going to have to build them. And we've had movements that have globalized, whether it's the anti-slavery movement, women's rights movement. We're going to have to build it, but it's going to have to be built consciously, which means a lot of listening, a lot of struggling with people coming in from different backgrounds. AGI, certainly we are training an infant. And so like with an infant, having a sense of what are the guardrails, what do we want, and what do we not want. Yes, AGI will help us solve problems. And AGI itself is not well defined. It will also help us pose problems. It will also help us solve problems that we ourselves haven't posed. And so I do think that there will be a Cambrian moment of, I don't even like to use the word artificial intelligence. It's its own thing. I called it alternative intelligence. It's like a dog doesn't have artificial human intelligence. It just has dog intelligence. And for all of this, yeah, we're going to need different kinds of lawyers, we're going to need different kinds of laws, and we're going to need to have societies that are functioning better. One of the problems that we're facing around the world, certainly in the United States, is that we've democratized governance and decision making, but we haven't democratized the learning, the engagement of people in knowledge networks, in judgment networks. And so if we are all going to be writers of this script, we really need to think about public engagement and empowerment, because otherwise we'll have these two ends of the spectrum, the people and like the transhumanists and others who are saying technology is all great, let's go for it. And we'll have the people on the other side of the spectrum who are saying, this stuff is going to kill us all, let's stop it. Neither of those are the right answer. We need to find our way through the middle, and it's going to be very difficult. But the first step is deciding that this is a problem we want to solve.
Thank you, Jamie. June? Yeah.
Yeah, so building on some of what Jamie was saying, I think if you asked all of us on the panel how we define AI or alternative intelligence, we'd probably all have very different definitions. So I think starting from a common kind of cognitive map and a taxonomy of what these technologies are is probably a good starting point. Related to the point around regulation, I think we would agree self-regulation is not enough. But also regulation, as usual, is probably not enough either. So the upskilling of regulators who are sector-specific, looking at different applications of AI will be really important. And that means building a lot of capacity within regulators as they are today. I think that also is related maybe to the question around lawyers. Of course, there are a number of regulations that already apply to AI currently. So data protection, among other things, a lot of like health and medical regulation applies to AI applications in those fields, but we don't have people who are skilled, we don't have that many people who are super skilled at interpreting what that means in practice. So I think that's an immediate need, and definitely, looking into the future, how do all of these different kind of siloed, vertical, narrow sets of regulations fit together and interface with real-world applications? I think that could probably be its own field, and certainly where we need more lawyers and more kind of upskilled regulators. And then I think just to come back to finding solutions, and someone asked about, aren't we asking the people coming up with the problems to find their own solutions? I think there are lots of really interesting methodologies for external pressures, for external audits, maybe not always coming up with solutions, but definitely surfacing issues from the outside. This like red teaming event that we did is one example of that. And so I think more kind of open-minded collaboration between maybe communities of practice who would use AI. So I think about our scientists, for example, our fellowship, who will be using AI in different fields, but maybe aren't AI experts themselves, could really be a bit more embedded in the communities of AI production in order to help us identify, what are those main concerns. I highlighted at the beginning there are some sort of epistemic questions coming out of using AI in science when we don't understand how these algorithms are coming up with cause and effect arguments. And that's a huge paradigm shift.
Yep.
So interfacing those communities, I think, will be really key for making these technologies work for everyone in the future.
Excellent. So back to the stakeholder theme of bringing agencies together, right, rather than having them act by themselves. Olivier?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I want to react on, to me it is quite the same topic, on regulation and education, because education, I guess, is really part of regulation for the future. And I think we need to raise awareness. It is true for governments. It is true, I guess, for engineers, also for them to have maybe much more education on ethics, for example. So it is something that we should all together keep working on. On the regulation, I am European. We love regulation in Europe. We have a lot of regulation. I am from the insurance sector. We have a lot of other regulation in the insurance sector. So, of course, I agree, self-regulation is not enough, but it is important. I will come back on it for your perspective. To me, the point is that when we are thinking about regulating technology, we should, one more time, define principles. And we should be as much as possible agnostic to the technology. Otherwise, you are always going to be outdated or late, because you are going to say technology are evolving faster than the law, and so it's always outdated. But you can define sometimes some good principles that can be versatile, that can be plastic, and then can adapt to the technology. I came from prior to be in the insurance sector, I was much more in the data protection field, and I guess the GDPR, it is a regulation which is not perfect, but there are some very strong principles that are here for years. I think it was in the 1970s that the very first principle of data protection had emerged. So it is the first point, to define principle rather than too much related technology laws or things like that. The other point is that self-regulation is important also. From an insurance perspective, our business is data-driven. So, of course, that technology can be very useful and bring some powerful things to our business. But we need to be very careful on how we're going to use it, because we can use it for underwriting, we can use it for fraud detection, we can use it for pricing. But if we are not using the good database, or if we are not careful enough, we could repeat some existing bias in the data that can lead to unfair pricing, for example. So this is a multi-stakeholder approach to regulation. Self-regulation is important, but not alone.
That's great. I mean, look, with all of these panels, I think one mark of success for me is that we go away slightly dissatisfied because there's so many more questions that have been raised than have actually been answered, right? And in the nature of what we're discussing especially, we really don't have clear answers. And what I was going to just do is to end off by saying that maybe one role that Foresight has for us is to help us ask better questions, right? What is AI actually? Because there are some things we know and some things we don't know, and we're sitting in the in-betweenness of that uncertainty. Who needs to act? Actually everybody, right? But who needs to take that first step? If all of us look around and wait for other sectors to actually make the first move, then there's not a lot that's going to happen, right? So a lot, I think, needs to rely on agency and the movement and proactiveness of groups like the ones that many of us come from. And then even the issue of what skills and expertise do we have, right, which several of you asked about. Some of that will come from inside our organization, some of it will come from outside, but we need to find ways for those skills to have a much better conversation with each other. So if you can just join me, please, in thanking the three panelists for being with us today. Thank you to the five questioners as well. I'm sorry to those of you we couldn't get to, but as always, we plan for the future because we don't have enough time in the present. So we work where we can. See you at some of the other sessions later on, and enjoy lunch. Good. Nice job. Thank you. Thank you. It's great fun.